Welcome everybody to the panel at AirMiners on accelerators and startups, figuring out how to form companies, accelerate the pace of carbon removal. As you heard in Marcus Extivor's remarks this morning, we're at 2.0 now. It's this carbon removal 2.0, and it means that there's a lot to do and there's a lot to make happen. We've just launched the AirMiners Launchpad to support early stage startup entrepreneurs, and I am that's in partnership with XPRIZE and Creative Destruction Lab. We're pleased to now be a part of the incredible startup ecosystem that's out there to support early stage companies in this space. And I'm pleased to be joined by Hannah from Techstars, who's part of the Techstars Sustainability Accelerator program, and Alex from Indiebio, who's a partner there and has worked with several AirMiner companies. Actually, I think both of you have worked with companies that people are going to be familiar with. Maybe to kick us off, could you start a bit, just maybe Hannah, you could talk about Nori and some of the other companies that you've seen and been able to work with.
Yeah, happy to be here. So we've worked with quite a few carbon removal companies, Nori, which is a carbon removal marketplace, starting with soil carbon removal, and Regen Network, which is more of a platform for all types of carbon removal and different ecosystem services as well. Those are probably the two most popular folks here would have heard of. We also work with other companies like Propagate Ventures, which does agroforestry companies as well. And those are probably the top ones folks here might know.
Awesome, thanks. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, I think the two maybe most directly in the space here that people have probably maybe heard of, one is Novo Nutrients, a company taking in waste carbon dioxide and turning it into protein and other like high value feed additives. They're right now just pre-Series A and have a couple pretty exciting kind of scale up partnerships. One signed, a couple in the works that I'm not sure if they've announced fully publicly yet with the details, but I think will be really big for the space. And then the other is Carbix, who actually met through the AirMiners community initially, and they're a bit earlier stage, building a new reactor to take in waste CO2 and alkaline rocks to make like aggregates for cement and other materials. Those are the two most directly. We've worked with a bunch, in eliminating methane emissions from animals, a bunch in future of food, some advanced materials, waste into hydrogen, and several others.
Excellent. That's great to hear. And I'm just looking through the poll. We've got 9 people who said they are already at a startup. So in the chat, shout out if you're at a startup and interested in joining one of these programs or something like that. We've also got 2 people who want to start companies, 4 people who are investors, nobody doing grants or non-equity funding, and somebody doing other, 2 other people doing other. So shout out what other means to you. That would be great to hear about that. So let's see. So in terms of just covering the agenda real quick, we've got this great hop-in feature. If you've been a part of the other panels this morning, we can actually bring people in from the audience. So we're going to be starting that. Some of the other panels have started about halfway through, 30 minutes in. So I've got some questions to kind of get us to that point, but we can also start a bit early if people really have good questions, they want to hop in. Just kind of hit up in the chat with what you're thinking about this. But yeah, we've got Alex and Hannah here to share their perspective, and so figured it'd be good to kick things off with them. Thinking about with this idea of taking flight. Marcus called it carbon removal 2.0. There's been a lot that's changed in the past 6 months or year in carbon removal. Seen a lot of venture funding starting to come in to companies like Climeworks, Carbon Engineering. Both of you are kind of at the earlier stage of that, but could you talk a bit about what you've seen? Is there something that you've kind of changed your mind about in these last 6 months? Maybe Hannah, you could kick us off with that.
Sure. So a quick background in terms of the area I focus most in is really around nature-based climate solutions. So our accelerator partners with the Nature Conservancy, which is the world's largest environmental nonprofit organization. They're in 76 countries around the world, all 50 states, and they focus on protecting land and water, providing sustainable food and water, and natural-based solutions to climate change. So that's just kind of context going into everything I will talk about. But in terms of something I've changed my mind about is actually, I was never really that interested in the fashion industry. I mean, personally, I'm not interested in it at all. But as a space, it felt really outside of our thesis. And lately, I've been rethinking that. I think fashion is an interesting example. I mean, it touches so many nodes along the supply chain and so many different aspects of climate. I think I read that 10% of global emissions are from something that touches the fashion industry. And it's a huge, huge industry. And so when I think about water, which is something we care about, when I think about waste, microplastics, all the carbon coming from the industrial processes, and of course, it's all just thrown away in landfills, I've become really interested in that. And then you layer on the labor and the equity issues. I think that there's just a lot of room for impact that we haven't seen yet. And we're seeing, I'm sure at Indiebio, but you've had a bunch of interesting materials companies, including like new kind of inks and fabrics and all. There's just like a lot of exciting things, I think, coming out of the industry, but I've changed my mind since I never really paid attention to it until recently.
Super interesting. Yeah, we've definitely seen more of that pop up at AirMiners. There's a new company that just joined that's doing textiles made with carbon dioxide.
Yeah, to jump in, there's a bunch of stuff, and Tito, we talked about it last week. One that actually has come to mind that's a bit different is there's more fundable startups than I actually thought. I think in the last 6 months, we've just been seeing kind of the explosion of spin-outs coming from like really top-notch research labs all over the world, operators from other industries coming in, and the pace there, I always thought it would be fast and have been kind of even part of AirMiners seeing that. And it's actually just, I think kind of it's at a hockey stick point in the exponential curve. I think that's a really big one that I'd point to. Then other places where I've changed my mind, one area that I'm thinking a lot about, I don't have an answer for this at all, is I'm really wondering about kind of innovation or changes in the funding landscape, maybe in how we might need to change the funding stack from kind of the way we traditionally think of venture. With so many companies that need kind of CapEx scale up and physical infrastructure, and how that does or doesn't fit to traditional venture models, where we might actually need some other types of players coming in earlier, which will shrink the timeline to market, I think, pretty significantly. So we're noodling on that a lot.
Interesting. Weren't we talking a little bit last week about kind of this rise of these companies doing kind of consumer first experiments or prototypes and as a pathway to build a bigger market?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one, for us, we have a lot of companies who take this approach, I think for a couple of reasons. One is, well, the big one is you kind of just capture a lot more margin. So for even long-term B2B companies, people that can go B2C and build some sort of momentum and brand, it just gets a lot of media and press, and investors like it. So that's definitely something that I think is a pretty common part of the business model. But again, it might be the type of thing where if you're looking to get to, if emissions become a metric over revenue, for example, maybe that route is a slight distraction because you have to build new capabilities to go to the consumer market as opposed to scaling for mass impact.
Yeah, I almost wonder if those two things connect, where we see kind of these interesting kind of fashion related things pop up where it's like high perceived value or high perceived demand, but the amount of material doesn't necessarily need to be a lot. So it might be that it's a step along the path for some of these early stage companies. What can you do with pounds? You can make, tons of t-shirts, even if it's not, even if you're not at scale yet. And just thinking back to our conversation last week, Hannah, you had mentioned something about oceans as well, that you were seeing a change in ocean companies.
Yeah, I think this one model I've seen actually fits what you just said, Alex. I think of the seafood industry. And so there's a lot of products in seaweed and kelp being grown because seaweed is really good at sequestering carbon, and it creates a really healthy ecosystem. So there's all sorts of benefits in addition to the carbon sequestration. And I'm seeing a lot of new products, consumer products specifically, in kelp and other types of seaweed. It can also be used, of course, for a feed for cattle to reduce methane emissions as well. And so that's one area I've seen a huge growth. And I do wonder kind of, when is that shift really from the B2C to the B2B going to take off? It's a different kind of supply chain that's being figured out now. The other area in oceans that I've seen a smaller but interesting uptick in is software companies supporting oyster farms. So oysters also are natural sequesters, and they also create really healthy ecosystems and protect coastal areas and are just really great to have. And so what I'm starting to see is just enabling support systems that aren't it's not directly around growing the oysters or the science behind it, but it's more like if the producers, the farmers of oysters, have better markets to sell their oysters to and more efficiencies there, then it's going to help the whole market grow and succeed. And so that's a smaller trend I've been seeing that is I feel excited about.
That's super cool. When you mentioned support, can you talk a bit about where are these founders coming from? What kind of support are they getting? What makes somebody decide to start a company working on oysters or oyster software?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are farmers or kids of farmers, and it's really a longer term family thing is what I'm seeing in oysters, seaweed. Alex and I share a portfolio company, Microterra, which grows algae to, right now they're focusing on growing it to put in as a food additive in pet foods that's much, much more sustainable, and it can sequester carbon. And Marissa, the founder of that, her mom is like a algae scientist, and it's kind of like just been in the family, and she grew up around it and kind of understanding these species. And so it's not always all, but I see in these industries more often that are really niche. I've seen that a bunch.
Just to jump in super quick, because I'm a big fan of the ocean space as well, and I think it's really nascent, but I've been kind of getting involved there for 3-4 years and learning about it and meeting players. And I think the last 6 months has likewise had a pretty, relative to where it was before on the translational kind of startup side, has had a pretty big explosion that I think is going to be continuing a lot. It is kind of in the seaweed kelp kind of food space as opposed to kind of some of the more maybe large scale kind of direct to ocean capture and kind of dealing with acidity, which I think needs to happen. But I think it's also a good opportunity for a lot of collaboration within academia, because there's a lot of really fantastic marine biology institutions that want to be doing this translational work. So that's a really cool area, I think, for kind of future startups.
Awesome. Yeah, we've definitely seen that in AirMiners. The Ocean-CDR channel is one of the biggest channels on AirMiners. We've had a bunch of events on ocean entrepreneurs and new ocean ideas. Alex, I want to go back to something that you said. When you mentioned that you're seeing more companies that are fundable. Could you expand a bit on what that means for somebody that's not in the space? You mentioned industry operators, like kind of to where we're kind of seeing people come out and start companies. What does that look like for you when you see these fundable things come up?
Yeah, so it does depend a little bit on where we're sourcing. And Indiebio, we have people who are industry veterans coming to start companies, but I think the bulk are actually spinning out of academia, so PhDs and postdocs primarily. So I think and that's kind of the whole thesis of Indiebio, whether it's biologists, material scientists, people who are in green chemistry, chemical engineers. We kind of thought this was kind of an untapped area for entrepreneurship and invention, where you didn't have to give it a tech transfer and let a big company take it. You could kind of do the YC thing and start a company as a young entrepreneur. And I think that idea is becoming just much more proliferated across that demographic across the world. And there's maybe more and more support for that than ever. So technologies that have probably had at times 5+ years, if you count the PI's experience, decades plus of foundational research, is now looking for kind of that. And it's ready, I would say, a bit more for actually early kind of scaling, prototyping, and kind of product development. So I think that's a really cool area. There's a lot of people coming out of academia with ideas and inventions. And they're also still looking to partner with people who maybe have built companies or worked in large companies who have really creatively valuable skills, whether it's hiring, doing business development, sales, marketing, or scaling manufacturing and technology.
Yeah, I'll just add, we also have a lot of PhDs in our program, and I ran a different accelerator before I was at Techstars, and that was pretty uncommon to see, but in this space, it's way more common than not.
Yeah, so academia, industry. Hannah, you're also part of an organization, Climate Raise. Could you talk about that as a source of new innovation and ideas?
Yes, Climate Raise is a nonprofit that helps connect female-led climate tech companies to investors and other ecosystem stakeholders. So that's broader than the thesis I invest in Techstars. That's really looking at anything that's reducing greenhouse gas emissions, carbon sinks, sequestration, broader sustainability. And it's really exciting. You can go to climateraise.com, sign up for our newsletter. You'll see all the awesome female-led companies that we feature. And the goal was really, I've talked to a lot of investors in terms of where that came from, that are wanting to invest in more women and seem to think that they don't exist. And so the point being that I think a ton exists in the climate space. I think that enough funding is not going towards them still in the broader tech issue that we see across tech and venture capital. And there's just so many amazing female founders. We wanted to create a platform to make it easy so nobody has any excuses for not investing in women-led companies.
That's awesome. I encourage everybody to check out Climate Raise. There's a link in the chat there as well. And for the AirMiners Launchpad as well, I want to invite any female founders to check it out. Let us know if it looks helpful. If it doesn't look helpful, also let us know. We can figure out how to make it helpful, because it needs to be. That's terrific. Really, great to hear about where these founders are coming from, where these new ideas are coming from, whether it's from industry experts or academia or other people getting inspired. I wanted to shift gears a little bit to so clearly you're seeing things from your lens. You're seeing things that have changed your mind. What about something that sort of doesn't quite make sense, or something that you've noticed that's like, it seems kind of like a weird thing that's happened in the last 6 months? Does anything come to mind when you're thinking about that, something that's unusual but doesn't really click yet?
I can start. It's not so much a trend, more like one-off examples.
Perfect. Yes, anecdotes are perfect for that.
I'm sure, similar to Alex, I talk to a lot of different founders, and so I hear some all sorts of things. One thing I saw, this doesn't have to do with carbon removal, but I just thought it was really weird. It's a hardware company that goes in rivers to like herd plastic waste to clean up plastic waste, and it was just really the intention was really there around cleaning up our rivers, and it's hard to imagine our rivers having these big barriers kind of blocking them. And so I thought that was a really capital intensive and a challenging business, to say the least, because you're going to be selling to governments, which a lot of our founders do, but something that's so visible in waterways. I thought that was a little weird, but cool. And another thing I saw that I thought was really exciting, again, sorry, this isn't exactly on carbon removal, I digress, but it's real-time species detection. So who knew that right now, if you're tracking an endangered species or something and you're looking at feces, you have to pick it up, send it to a lab, they'll figure it out, what is it? It's very expensive, it takes 6 months, and then you learn that you are not even tracking the right snow leopard or whatever. And so they're creating a real-time detection thing, kind of like a pregnancy test that you could use, and you could use it for illegal trading too. It does, not just feces, but all sorts of different ways to just very quickly detect what a species is. So super powerful when it comes to conservation, and I was excited about that. It is similar to probably a lot of these companies that, I talked to the founder, and she was like, "Yeah, we'll be in R&D, for the next couple of years, and hopefully we can get her to join Techstars and speed up some of that." But it was exciting to see. And that was a first for me, so.
It's a good question. I think something that I don't know if it quite qualifies as weird, but it's like kind of eye-raising and a little confusing is
Yes.
within working with a lot of big industry. So we kind of have connections across many because of the breadth of the portfolio. I've been trying to kind of decode the what does it really take to be deploying really new pilots, especially in certain core areas. And I've been finding that that's just been, as we have like a really big host of industry commitments around, net zero or getting rid of half their emissions, et cetera, and kind of a lot of this change. There's still kind of this early stage kind of black box of kind of deploying and getting into these companies that I don't know if it quite qualifies as weird, but it's been just a big puzzle we're trying to crack a bit more, which is also kind of related to what I said before around kind of different funding models. So that's been, it's also kind of different depending on which big company around the world we look at. So actually I'm kind of interested in US versus other geographies for maybe early stage pilots and collaborations. That's something that kind of publicity versus reality is something where it's still not matching up that much to me. And I'm trying to kind of better get a grasp on that and help our companies navigate that as well.
Just to expand a little bit on that, when you're saying publicity versus reality, can you give just like a generic example of what that might look like?
One that's been on my mind lately, and you guys, I think, spoke a little bit about before, was methane emissions specifically. So deploying solutions into that. And seaweed is one that I see the most happening there, but I also see, I don't want to say the flimsiest science behind it, but kind of it's relatively kind of erratic, and it's kind of, how would I put it? Looking more at phenotype as opposed to genotype. So it's kind of not looking to the really like, there's probably a couple key molecules and pathways, key molecules from seaweed and key pathways in cows that are kind of being hacked, so to speak. But it's kind of a very non-precision medicine approach, I would say, to solving this problem. And
Sure.
as I, look at how deploying of new science and technology there is happening, or is not happening actually by big players, it's kind of, there's some disconnect between the solutions that are or not deployed and kind of the goals of companies.
Got it. Super interesting.
Can I ask Alex a question?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah.
I don't know your background, but I get the sense you might have more of a science background than I do. I heard recently that actually a lot of types of seaweed, in terms of people wanting to increase production and really scale seaweed, actually that there's a lot of science like issues with that in terms of certain species not actually being able to be farmed and scaled. Is that anything you've heard about?
Yeah, and there's certainly, I'm sure, better experts in the AirMiners community and likely in the crowd who will be like, no, this is, missing a lot of nuance. One of the big things that I've talked to a few entrepreneurs in the space and some are trying to solve is also around, especially if we're trying to scale it, being able to kind of control conditions. One of the big ones, and there's an interesting company focused on it, is controlling light. So you can actually use like different wavelengths of light will be triggering different kind of genetic pathways within the seaweed, whether it's proliferation and just general growth or kind of certain compounds being expressed in high concentrations. So I think a big one is like, how are you kind of holding it and giving it nutrients in the ecosystem? I think of it similar to, working with cells with synthetic biology companies. There's kind of the media or the broth that is giving it the nutrients, the gases and everything. And controlling that to do large scale in the ocean is certainly much more difficult than if you're in a bioreactor or somewhere that's kind of more closed loop.
Thank you.
Yeah, if anybody's interested in more on that, we had an ocean entrepreneurship panel at AirMiners where it was basically all these entrepreneurs just being like, you just like are like continually slamming your head against a brick wall trying to figure out how to scale this stuff. And it's like, basically the ocean is like Pele, the lava god, except that there's like these like vengeful gods in the ocean that just hate your experiments and your sensors and your housing and everything. So it's interesting to hear about that. There's if you check out the AirMiners YouTube channel, there's a good recording of that. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, this came up kind of on the policy discussion as well, but the role of like large corporates. Alex, you talked about pilot partnerships. but specifically, again, in this kind of in the last 6 months or so, are you seeing anything change from a corporate perspective from where you're at?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what's changed really recently, the area of industry that I see the most happening in is food, and we've been really involved there. And I would say there is a funding revolution in ways, and science revolution there. I've actually seen quite a bit from heavy industry, so construction, which is an area we've looked at for a number of years and placed some bets. And I think heavy industry is actually being proactive in a way that's pretty surprising to me, actually, given kind of the challenges of the huge CapEx infrastructure, the thin margins, kind of the commodity nature of that business. But relative to that, I've been pretty surprised at how proactive they've been. Chemicals included in that. So that's an area we play in quite a bit. I think I'm seeing a lot of movement.
Yeah, we one thing about Techstars, so we're just one of 45 accelerators around the world that we run, and we're seeing general increase from corporates across our network of all of our accelerators in sustainability. So, for example, we started running these sustainability challenges in which they're non-equity. The goal is really to help connect founders to partners for paid pilots. And we've had interest from corporates that run different accelerators, say our Comcast accelerator, that now want to be in this discussion around sustainability and around supply chain and net zero. And it's a really great opportunity to engage them in some of the work that's going on at sustainability. And we have a few other programs. So Heritage Group, we have a partnership with that is a lot to what Alex just said in the materials and chemicals and really heavy industry. And their program is really interested in within that industry in sustainability specifically. And then also same in the ag space, we have a partnership for our Farm to Fork program with Cargill and Ecolab, also really trying to increase the number of sustainability companies that go through those programs.
That's awesome. It's great. It's always great to see a pipeline forming, and that's where, again, this idea of taking flight is just, this has been a decade or more in the works, but now the pieces are in place, and things are ramping up very quickly. The last question I have before we start to bring in people from the participants button, if people are want to start coming up to ask questions, like click, it's in the upper right hand corner. You click to ask to share your audio and video. It'll show up here. But just one kind of last thought was, is there anything that you're curious about that you'd love to see kind of more happening in carbon removal over the next 6 months or so? Is there some problem in carbon removal that you think, it'd be cool if somebody went after that?
Beyond what I mentioned in ocean-based solutions, that is one that I've been looking at for quite a while. I would say one of the other big areas that comes to mind right away, and actually it's echoing Hannah in the beginning, we placed a few bets in fashion that have gone really well, and I think that is actually an area that does have pretty heavy emissions, a lot of use. It's going to only be going up as kind of a global middle class is growing and growing. So I think a lot of innovations both in kind of the genesis of materials, whether through synthetic biology, direct air capture into something, regenerative farming practices, as well as kind of process and end of life. I think all that, from talking to big companies there, is a very open space. I think fashion companies actually do a pretty decent job as well of working with young companies as well. So that's one.
Yeah, I don't have a direct kind of idea, but one thing that is on my mind is, so indigenous people make up about 5% of the world's population, but they manage over 25% of the Earth's surface. And so, and I think that I read somewhere that indigenous people, when they're taking care of the land, it'll be like 3 to 4 more times like lower carbon output and issues. Unsurprisingly, they take better care of the land. And so I'm really interested, just feels like an opportunity to somewhere there around enabling indigenous people to start their own companies in these spaces and really gain from from the benefit of the lands in which they're already caring for. So that's one thing that comes to mind. And I think in general, I would say a lot of opportunities, both as own kind of new things, as well as just incorporating into existing organizations, is around climate justice work. And so 92% of greenhouse gas emissions are from the global north, which is about 19% of our population. And that means 8% of emissions are from the global south, which is also the area in which bears the heaviest consequences of climate change and floodings and temperatures and all that. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to keep that in mind as people are doing whatever work they're doing, as well as, perhaps some especially natural-based solutions when it comes to, conservation and restoration of a lot of these ecosystems, which we've destroyed. I don't know what the opportunity is, but there's something there. And I think it's really important to have that lens in whatever you're working on.
Well said.
Yeah, I think that actually, I think it's a very interesting point around environmental justice and climate justice, where, and some people on my team, I think, have dug into this more than me, is when you look at one of the greatest resources of a lot of those places is there's incredible sun, which does lead to then incredible energy. So it's, I think, an opportunity also for a lot of technologies, whether direct air capture, kind of biotech enabled, or others, of how can we have lower capex modular units that allow places who, with kind of their renewable resources, to actually be power, like kind of getting free power to these kind of value accretive and creative processes and products that they can then kind of help rebuild local infrastructure in a way and kind of build clean industries from the ground up, as opposed to a lot of the dirty ones that tend to kind of focus in areas that maybe have lower income.
Yeah, that actually reminds me too. I think there could be cool opportunities around the integration of renewables, so solar and wind, and biodiversity. So looking at land for multiple uses of not just kind of the setup of solar, but integrating it with agroforestry or integrating it with crops or something like this. Grasslands are huge carbon sequestration, in regenerative farming industry. So kind of like bringing together a few different, the energy space and this regenerative space. I imagine there could be some cool ideas there.
Nice. I really like where this thread's going. I see Thomas is in chat is saying plus 1,000. That's the highest plus I've seen all day. So if anybody wants to join in, William's here to hop in as well. But yeah, if we want to keep this thread going, or start a new question, however it works. Hey, William.
Hey, all right. So I'll try and put this as eloquently as possible. But so when you're trying to form a company, you want to be careful which kind of entity that you're creating, whether it's for-profit, non-profit, or somewhere in between, and that sort of limits your funding options, especially if you were trying to look at doing work in the global south. Have you work on like where there could be like whatever it's called mixed funding sources, where you might get some from philanthropy and some from like private equity? And how is that space growing? Because obviously most of the accelerators in the world are more game towards like for-profit and traditional VC route.
Do you want to go ahead? Oh, okay.
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, great question. I'm definitely not an expert in the space, but it's something I've thought of, and I'm excited. Alex talked about some different types of funding, so excited to hear what he has to say. I think I've seen quite a few companies that have both the for-profit and the non-profit arm to have flexibility to bring in philanthropic as well as venture capital. I think you definitely want to have good lawyers and make sure you don't get anything crossed if you're taking that route. But most of the companies we work with tend to be public benefit corporations, and that's the route they go, which of course the funding still is going to be mainly from venture capital, and then taking advantage of non-diluting funding when it comes from, NSF, SBIR grants, kind of more traditional non-dilutive opportunities. that's mostly what I've been seeing in the companies that we work with. I am hoping maybe we'll take a nonprofit into our accelerator this year, which we've only worked with for-profits in the past. But I do think there's a lot of impact nonprofits can have if they're a nonprofit for the right reason. And so, yeah, I think thinking through from the beginning is a really important part in terms of how you can grow the business and what the values are in terms of what kind of return are you looking to create.
Yeah, from my end, and I think you'll hear most VCs will typically say it. We're investing in typically Delaware C Corp, and we invest in a lot of international companies from South and Latin America. We've had a number from in Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa. A number from India and other places, and the majority of those also incorporate as a U.S. Delaware C. I think some of the benefits there is it opens them up to the greatest amount of venture capital that the bulk of that investors from those geographies still can and do invest. I think that structure works for the majority of them that I've met so far. And I've also seen them still be able to do grant making wherever they're from. And most of our companies are heavily technical. So they're going to be getting probably, grant making that needs that. If they're not, I believe, over 50% owned by a U.S. citizen or entity, I don't think they can qualify for U.S. Grant funding. You could double check me on that. But I think even for a lot of international companies, being a Delaware C, if you have a true connection in the U.S., can help you raise money and do all that. We have a number who are still maybe from incorporated or transferred back to where they're from and are raising money that way. So that's kind of the pretty standard model.
Appreciate it. Good perspective.
Yeah, thanks for being here, William. Feel free to stay on. We can boot you later, but if you want, I think you're a great participant on one of the past panels as well. Rohit, you had hopped up in as well. And again, anybody else who wants to join in, click that button. It's sort of scary, but hey, it's 2021 and we've got 1 trillion tons of excess carbon in the air. So, oh, good, we got Thomas Morgan. Great. Rohit, take it away.
So just a question about maybe hardware and accelerators. So I guess a hardware project from inception, maybe 3 to 5 years. I'm sort of guessing, but 3 to 5 years to market. And if the founder chooses to go through an accelerator and everything else. So 2 questions. One, this is partly for everyone just to also learn. Does the founder get paid, or does he have to live in a car for a couple of years? And within that, so once there's a set of dilutions that come in, what does the founder end up with directionally? What should he expect to end up with? Should a founder expect to end up with, say, 10% of a hardware company after a few years, and he didn't get paid much in year 1, year 2, but then, once he got towards a sort of later seed round, he got paid? What do you think is the journey, and is anything wrong with that journey that holds people back from coming in and being founders? Especially because I think one of the interesting things is that we want to bring as many people as we can into the climate space, but a lot of people are in their 30s, 40s, 50s. They've got families, they've got mortgages, etc. They would perhaps find it difficult to come in and take risk for a number of years. So how do we bridge that? How do we solve that?
Yeah, a few thoughts. So for us, we encourage all the founders to take a salary during Indiebio with our funding. It's going to be a lower salary. And we've had people who've been able to be unpaid, people who take pretty much rent and food, people who are a little bit higher because they have other needs. That will jump up, like in your seed round, if you raise, let's say 2 to 5 million, it can, jump up to just throwing an average like 80 or 90K maybe, and then a little bit higher at Series A and beyond. Typically, and for us, I would say I've seen most of the time, and most VCs agree, the founders are not going to be the highest paid people within a company because they're incentivized by having the most shares in the company, and their price per share should be going up throughout kind of all the stages of the company's life. And a lot of VCs will encourage, if you reach like Series B, kind of the early to mid growth stage, to actually sell some of your shares on the secondary market to be able to kind of have some of that cushion and not feel a ton of pressure, because there is a lot of pressure for VCs. That said, in terms of fixing it, I imagine, and I think a lot of people have talked about it probably there, it does, if the U.S. doesn't have always the best social safety net for people who, you know, don't have, you know, family or savings or things like that. So being able to get people a living wage from the very beginning, I think, is really important, and along with health insurance and all those other things. So I think ways to fix that would allow more people to kind of take the risk that the first couple of years of a startup typically really entail.
Yeah, and there are some fellowships out there. Activate Fellowship, as well as accelerators that provide funding. Breakthrough Energy Ventures is doing a paid fellowship. And so essentially they provide capital for entrepreneurs during the first couple of years of founding the companies to help them have that stipend. We need to see more of those fellowships and non-dilutive capital to support with that. I've seen a lot of university partnerships when it comes to hard tech. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, folks that are working on hard tech throughout their PhD, which gives a little bit more time to get it developed.
To add very quickly, just for context, Indiebio gives $475K cash for people who are entering the program. So there is money for 2 to 3 co-founders to have a salary. Your other question around equity and dilution, pretty typically for a deep tech company, you're looking at 20 to 30% probably in each round of funding, kind of getting taken by investors. That might change a bit based on having competing term sheets and a lot of interest, but it's really around kind of the milestone hopping, and at each stage in seed and Series A, typically those are kind of the ownership targets for a lot of investors. That might go down a little bit as you're more de-risked later on. And certainly if you get non-dilutive capital, that will help potentially kind of let you hit bigger milestones without getting diluted.
Nice, good stuff. And thanks to Shannon in the chat for asking that question. Shannon, if you want to hop in, you're welcome to hit the join button. I think Thomas, you're the next person who had hopped in. I saw William hopped out, that's how it goes. What's up, Thomas?
Hey, thanks, Tito. The plus 1,000 was actually Lucy Lowe had beat me to that, but Hannah was talking about four different things actually that we discussed in 2 of the other panels, which came up. It was totally awesome. Biodiversity, conservation, multi-use, carbon, climate development, and co-benefits. So that's where the plus 1,000 came from, and I'd like to continue that discussion offline or with whoever wants to focus on those things, because that's what I'm working on. But specifically to this panel, I had a question for Tito and Hannah. And maybe you already have something in the works, but there's so many great ideas, concepts, businesses, stemming up out of the carbon removal space and everything you're doing here at AirMiners. Wondering if there's going to be an opportunity for basically platforms, for us to invest. Like if I saw a project I wanted to invest in, like on Securitize or Republic, or I know AngelList is doing some stuff, but I'd love to, buy tokens, buy shares, like just invest in all this stuff, basically. So I wonder if that's in the works.
Cool, I can take that one. Yeah, definitely. So with the AirMiners Launchpad, we're setting up a fund to be able to invest into early stage companies as they're getting started, help them get to the next stage where there's this incredible ecosystem. I like the idea of what you're talking about, but it's not something we specifically have looked into. But sort of what you're saying is helping really early stage companies get to something that looks like a carbon market, kind of along the lines of what you've seen from Shopify and Stripe. Is that kind of line with how you're thinking about it?
Actually, not just on the carbon offsets, but like actually shares of a company, more like a
got it.
Reg D, Reg A plus, Reg CF, where there was one this morning, Exodus. They're in the crypto space, and they raised I don't know, $26 million or something on a private public offering. I'm not sure what they're terming it, but it was raised through Securitize, I believe. And so the platform, you just invest with your wallet. You can use ETH or Bitcoin. I mean, or dollars, whatever you want. But I see this whole ecosystem popping up where you could, just invest in the things you're interested in or believe in, or the founders you believe in, and it's a way for startups to just raise more money and get more advisory.
I hear that, Alex and Hannah. I see maybe you've seen kind of more of these newer mechanisms. I see Jeremy Epstein mentions rolling investment funds, which is something that, as far as I know, AngelList has been a leader there. Any comments on those kind of platforms or opportunities popping up for early stage founders?
We haven't had too many founders who've done crowdfunding at the moment. I think it's an interesting play. I think especially when companies, for companies that have more of a consumer angle as well, like I think it makes sense to be letting consumers kind of share the upside of a company, which is kind of something that the individual investor gets locked out of oftentimes, as well as it is, we talk so much about building a movement. All these companies and this community, like we're building a movement in a way to do different things to change the world towards this goal. So if you can get more people involved and enrolled, I think that's really, really powerful. So I think those crowdfunding platforms will definitely have a role to play coming up.
Yeah, I think it's a business opportunity for anyone listening of a climate specific, republic or whatever, so that if you're investing, it's hit a certain threshold of climate sustainability, that someone else did the diligence on that, and you're making a good investment. Someone should build it.
I'm laughing at Rohit's comment there, the MJ squared.
Cool. Also, we've got some more people hopping in. Let's see, who was up next? It's either Benoit or Matthew, and then Shannon. Also, welcome to the hop in. Benoit, I think you were up. You were up next.
Okay, what's the question?
That is the question. Thank you, Benoit. You get to ask a question if you'd like. Otherwise, we can move over next to Matthew.
Well, yeah, Paul already mentioned we're looking for financing. I just want to say, look, I've been a tree planter in 5 Canadian provinces. I've planted 3 million trees, and by myself.
Wow.
This is not trees I got planted by others. It's trees I actually planted. So I have an expertise into forestry roads across Canada, and I have an expertise into piles of woods that have been piled to actually plant trees in between the piles. Those are sites where there are huge forest fires, like 30 kilometers by 30 kilometers that burn down. And all this wood is being piled, and all this wood can be paralyzed to produce biochar on a massive scale. And if anyone is interested into investing into producing carbon credits from biochar and then using the biochar, I mean, me and Paul, that is also on this call, we're actually looking for serious investors. We had discussion with different structures, in particular Pure Earth. But what's unique is the quantity of biomass we have available that is perfectly dry and can be paralyzed on site. So we're not moving the biomass around here. We have the biomass on site that can, and we have 2 technologies we're going to be testing.
Benoit, I'm going to hop in here just because the deal is having a question, but how should people get in contact with you besides joining the biochar channel on AirMiners? If you can paste your email or something into
I will paste my email.
Chat.
But I'm sorry I arrived late, so I don't know what the deal is exactly. So I hope I didn't say things that I was not supposed to say or whatever.
Oh, all good. I'm sure we've got a bunch of people here who are just looking at the poll. About 19 other people who have started companies. So great to hear from you, and thank you. Matthew, you're up next, and then Shannon. Anybody else who has a question or a plus 1,000 they'd like to deliver in person, just hit that join button. Matthew, welcome.
Hey, yeah. Yeah, awesome to hear about the 3 million trees. Good job on that. Thank you for your service. My question is about it's about media. You know, I think some of you already know that this is what I'm working on. Currently, it's just because I see what we all see, which is that the stories out there about climate are generally about the fires and the ecosystem destruction and the pollution and the toxicity. And this is mostly what the stories are about, being published by the New York Times or, you know, the big papers. And we go to Netflix and we see that there's fantastic fungi. I don't know if they're on Netflix, but you know, there's a couple, there's the Great Little Farm, there's some things out there, but the vast majority of what we're seeing isn't really escaping our realm. So my question is, I don't know exactly how to frame it, but are you thinking about letting media plays into these accelerators? Because you know, it seems like the answer so far has been no, but y'all want it. It's helpful for the companies who participate. So yeah, I guess I'll just kind of throw it out there. I'm curious how you're thinking about this. It's a really exciting time in media. I mean, what is media in 2021 anyway? So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I love it. I want to hear, maybe put in your chat what kind of media you're working on. So I was actually recently just thinking about this because I'm a vegan, and so everyone, if I mention that, people are like, oh, I watched this film and then I became a vegetarian. And like literally everyone I talk to that's become a vegetarian is because they watched some sort of documentary on Netflix. So you're totally right. The power is huge. There was an accelerator, and I'm just forgetting the name of it. It was by the folks who did Chasing Coral and Chasing Ice. They created an accelerator for media companies that want to use media for change. And I wish I could think of the name of it, but it's super great. And I would check that out. It will come to me later. Because your model is probably going to fit more their model and what they're used to and their investors and everything like that. I think for us, one, for my program specifically, we have to find companies that are really aligned with the Nature Conservancy, and also, you know, we're hitting a certain venture kind of scale in terms of what we're investing in. That doesn't mean it's not a great and impactful and can be a huge business. It's just, you want to find the right partners when you think about an accelerator that are going to give you what you need. And if we don't have any experience in media, we might not be giving you the value that you deserve by being in an accelerator. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, I would echo Hannah. I mean, it's incredibly important for every company who's going through one of these programs. Like, we just are by no means media experts, so we kind of, it doesn't really make sense for us. And we're also raising money from LPs who want us to invest. If we start doing media alongside biotech, they're kind of like, well, you're using our money to do something different than kind of we originally kind of agreed on, so to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm talking with somebody who I met through AirMiners about potentially doing something like an incubator that brings together people in media and people in climate tech, just to create that connection and then see what comes of it. So
cool.
Thanks.
And it was
Awesome.
Exposure Labs is what I was thinking of. I don't know if they still run their accelerator or not, but worth looking into.
Sweet.
Would that be maybe exposurelabs.com?
Yeah, just put it in the chat.
Cool. Nice. Awesome. Nice one. Shannon, what's up with you? Welcome. And anybody else who wants to queue up in the hop-in, please join.
Yeah.
Hey, Shannon.
Hey. I posted that question earlier. Wasn't quite sure if this was asked before or if this was done in the introductions. But what's the startups that should apply to your pitch to each of your firms? Like, so what round, seed A, et cetera, or target valuation? What, we talk a little bit about that, and then I'd say the next 5 years. So kind of for some of the projects that are more heavy, hardware heavy, be in a bit of flux until they get to maybe startup.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we're focused on really core science companies, synthetic biology, material science, green chemistry, hardware. Some purely AI, but that's rare, though we're open to it. So for us, we look for a minimum of 2 co-founders. We'll talk to people when they're a single founder as well. And it can be everything from as early as idea stage with kind of scientific underpinning of why there's feasible science here and kind of a path to prototype and kind of first proof of principle, all the way to people who've raised a little bit of money, have a prototype, maybe even a couple first customers. That's a little bit less frequent, but we play at the earliest stages. We invested in the first lab-grown meat companies and kind of all protein companies doing carbon negative cement before they even have prototypes. So we do go very early. Typically, we're looking for at least one, usually a PhD level founder to lead the technical side of things because these are such science heavy companies. So that's kind of the general overview.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question because applications are open for our accelerator through May 12th. Worth mentioning. So we take companies anywhere from pre-seed to post-seed, maybe early Series A, and kind of the sectors I talked about earlier: protecting land and water, providing sustainable food and water, and natural-based solutions to climate change. We'll work with software and hardware companies. We've had material science as well. And we, I just lost my train of thought. We will take solo founders. We have a preference for teams with co-founders, but we've taken, it's really a range. We work with 10 companies a year, and so we can create the program to really meet wherever they're at. So I like to get a diverse group in terms of each class that we have. So I'll probably work with a company that has an MVP and done a couple prototypes and pilots, and we'll probably have a company that has 100K in annual recurring revenue and a team of 20. So we tried intentionally to span companies across different stages within early stage companies, and then offer up to 120K in funding support for the program. And I'll put the website where there is applications and everything to learn more for anyone interested.
And is there, just one quick add-on, is there consideration of, say, what the value of removals is that calculated and weighted into the cost or weighted into the prospective value of the company?
Yeah, definitely. So we're very focused on impact, and it may not just be carbon removal. That's one indicator. We could look at other ones as well. And we specifically will only work with companies who the business model and the impact model are linked. So as the business grows, the impact's going to grow. And we're, probably similar to Alex, like we're a little different than typical Techstars in that we're okay with long time horizons, we're okay with selling to governments, we're okay with hard tech, all these things that you see in sustainability that other Techstars accelerators maybe aren't a little bit used to working with.
Yeah, I'll add a few things. We have 2 cycles per year, roughly about 4.5 months. We do work with companies. If we meet a company 6 months before a cycle starts, we can actually start working with them, wire cash, and that helps them actually raise money, typically more effectively even. So that's kind of the thing. We'll talk to a solo founder and kind of give them guidance and feedback, and maybe sometimes help them through our network. They might even find a co-founder occasionally. The other thing to say there, just for people knowing our fund, we're a $277 million main fund with a $100 million growth fund. The vast majority of that goes to follow on into companies after the accelerator stage. So we do work with our companies, through seed, Series A, Series B, and beyond. And we do small cohorts of roughly 12 companies at a time because it's very hands-on in that way.
Excellent, thank you. Hugely helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you both for all the communication. Thank you everybody that hopped in, everybody that posted questions. Just one last plug for Indiebio, for Techstars programs. These programs open up throughout the year, so keep an eye on them on the calendar. We also have the AirMiners Launchpad. That's applications for the first batch are closing at the end of this month. We've got an information session coming up on May 19th. So keep an eye on the AirMiners calendar for that. Here's a link to the Launchpad in case you're looking for that. And with that, just want to say thank you to Hannah and Alex for coming here to help build this next phase of carbon removal. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Tito. Anyone, feel free to message me on AirMiners or on LinkedIn. Happy to chat with people after this as well. So
Same.
Beautiful.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone.